Welcome back, friends, to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees, and this is my equally talented co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. We both show up every week. We do this podcast in 20 minutes or less. Dr. Ryman, you want to tell them why we're here and why we're so passionate about what we do?
Absolutely. Well, we're passionate because it can be really difficult to find good science-backed information about cannabis on the internet. Not only is cannabis forbidden for conversation on a lot of social media channels, but there are a lot of folks out there that think they're experts and are not shy about saying that. So you could have a really good question about cannabis. You could Google it. You could get 100 different responses, many of which are going to completely contradict each other. So what is the truth? Well, that's where we come in. We're here to give it to you straight. We're going to give you the information that you need in order to make the best, healthiest decisions about your cannabis use. And as Christina said, we're going to do it all in 20 minutes or less. We know that you're busy people, so we want you to get the information you need and get on with your day. You can think of us as your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters, the women in your life who will always tell you the truth.
Yeah, and the women in your life who like to have fun. And that's what we do on this show. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you're someone who comes back every week, thank you for your support and listening. Today, we're going to pop the cork on a classic debate. Is alcohol actually healthier than cannabis? So whether you're team wine or ride or die for the green, it's a question that stirs up a lot of buzz and a few raised eyebrows. So grab your favorite mocktail or your munchies, and let's unpack the stigma and surprises behind these two popular ways to unwind. So, Dr. Ryman, more and more people are skipping the booze in favor of cannabis. Cannabis drinks are becoming more popular. I've even seen it in the bars now. You can order a cannabis drink in the bar. The vape pens, you've got vape pens, infused seltzers. Lots of cannabis products are becoming the go-to intoxicant for people who want to avoid calories, hangovers, and health risks associated with alcohol. So is this a smart choice to move over to cannabis, or is this a marketing motivated trend? When we look at the science, is cannabis healthier than alcohol? Is having a little cannabis now and then worse than having my evening cocktail?
Great question. And yes, we're absolutely seeing a rise in people that are using cannabis instead of alcohol. Some of this is driven by availability, right? So being able to have that cannabis infused seltzer available to you or cannabis infused gummy available to you. Not everyone wants to smoke. And during Prohibition, really the only cannabis that was available was cannabis that you smoked. So now that there are so many other types of products available in all kinds of doses, a lot of people are looking to cannabis as a substitute for alcohol for reasons that we'll get into. Another thing driving this is that Gen Z, those young folks out there, just aren't as interested in alcohol. The generation before me and you, the boomer generation and the generation before them, smoking cigarettes was really popular. I remember growing up and having smoking sections in restaurants. I remember having smoking sections on the airplane and in the airport. And it was not uncommon for people's parents to smoke. A couple of my grandparents smoked. My dad smoked for a long time when I was growing up. But now smoking cigarettes has really fallen out of favor. It's not that people don't do it, but we made it so you can't smoke in any public places. You can't smoke in restaurants. You can't smoke on the airplane for sure. And so you don't see it as much. And that is starting to happen with Gen Z and alcohol. Whereas my generation and the millennials that came after us, they were really more about going to the bars to hang out. I started having alcohol when I was in high school. It was really this sign of kind of growing up and being mature and breaking the rules to have alcohol before you were old enough to. Bars were definitely social spaces. They were where we all hung out. But when we look at Gen Zs, they're not acting the same way that we did. It's not as popular to just go hang out at a bar on Friday night. They are much more interested in online activities and communities. And so we're seeing a decrease in the number of people that are interested in drinking, just as we saw a decrease in the number of people that were smoking cigarettes. And so the question is cannabis becoming the substitute for this? And is that a healthy thing? So let's get into it. Overall, yes. Answer is yes. Cannabis poses fewer health risks than alcohol. So probably the biggest difference here is that there is no fatal overdose of cannabis like there is alcohol. So if you drink too much alcohol, basically the part of your brain that sends the message to breathe shuts off. It becomes so depressed that it stops working and you don't breathe and then you die. That doesn't happen with cannabis. There are no endocannabinoid receptors in this part of the brain. So no matter how much cannabis you consume, even if it's an overdose and you're uncomfortable, you're not going to get to the point where you no longer breathe and you die. So risk of fatal overdose, no risk of fatal overdose. That's a huge difference. I would say that another huge difference is behavioral. So alcohol use, especially overuse, is associated with aggressive behavior, assaults, sexual assault, basically things where people are losing control of their rationality, of their impulsivity, and sometimes that's associated with violence. We do not see that with cannabis. Overconsumption of cannabis can lead to sleepiness, it can lead to paranoia, it can lead to anxiety, but it very, if ever, leads to violent behavior. So that's another big difference. I would say another way we see cannabis being safer than alcohol is the impact on driving. Now, do not drive if you are intoxicated, okay? It doesn't matter if we're talking about cannabis, alcohol, or Benadryl. If you are intoxicated, you should not be getting behind the wheel of a car. However, cannabis intoxication and alcohol intoxication do not work the same way when we're talking about driving. People that are regular cannabis consumers, medical patients, people that consume every day, show very little impairment when it comes to driving. People that are occasional cannabis consumers, so people that consume maybe once a week, once a month, a couple times a year, do show higher levels of impairment when getting behind the wheel of a car. So cannabis intoxication and driving is not tied to blood alcohol level or blood level the way that alcohol is. So alcohol, we've determined that anything 0.08 is considered intoxicated. We really don't have that same kind of measure for cannabis. So these risks exist with both substances. They're just slightly different when it comes to cannabis. Other differences I'll mention is that alcohol is very taxing on the liver and other vital organs. Cannabis, when it's smoked or when you're consuming a nano-emulsified edibles product or beverage, does not pass through the liver. So there's no interaction there with the liver at all. And even if you are eating an edible and it is passing through the liver, it's not causing liver toxicity the way that alcohol does. So cannabis, a lot friendlier on the liver and other bodily organs. I will also say that, you know, when we're talking about some cannabis infused products like beverages, there's no sugar versions, there's no carb versions, there's no calorie versions. So like Lagunitas has their infused hops water, 0 calories, 0 sugar. So that's definitely a huge difference. Alcohol, a lot of calories, a lot of sugar. And then, as you mentioned, there's not as much chance of a hangover. I will say usually. So if you consume a lot of cannabis, you may feel groggy the next day, like kind of tired, maybe a little out of it, but you're not going to have the nausea, the headaches, and the things that we usually associate with an alcohol.
Yeah, and the no hangover is key since nobody wants to be ending the night in the bathroom over the toilet. Are there any ways in which alcohol is safer than cannabis? Like, can you get hooked on cannabis like people do with alcohol or cigarettes?
Yes. So, but differently. So we do have a whole episode on and I get addicted to THC. And the answer is that yes, people can become physically and psychologically dependent on THC. It's not as common as dependence on alcohol or dependence on nicotine or even dependence on caffeine or sugar. You are more likely to become dependent on those other substances with regular use than you are cannabis. But cannabis dependence does exist. Now, getting off of cannabis is different than getting off of alcohol if you're experiencing dependence. You can experience some mild to moderate withdrawals if you stop using cannabis and you're a regular moderate to heavy consumer. Those withdrawal symptoms are probably going to last a week or two. There are things like being irritable, having trouble sleeping, not having as much appetite. And these withdrawal symptoms are really more to do with your endocannabinoid system kind of getting itself up and running again than it is actual withdrawal from the chemical that you are dependent on. Now, alcohol withdrawals are very different. Cannabis can actually be used as a medication for alcohol withdrawals, which can include things like nausea, tremor, difficulty regulating your body temperature, difficulty sleeping. But I will mention that if you have severe dependence on alcohol, alcohol withdrawals can actually be quite serious to the point of being fatal. So if you are somebody that is dependent on alcohol, who is drinking a lot of alcohol, who experiences things like tremors when you don't drink alcohol, if you decide to stop using alcohol, it's a good idea to do it in a medically supervised way. There are medications that you can be given in order to make sure that your alcohol withdrawals are not too severe. So dependence does exist with both substances, but dependence on cannabis is going to be a lot milder and a lot easier to deal with for most people than dependence on alcohol. But I think that kind of the main area where alcohol, it doesn't necessarily safer, but alcohol gives us some guardrails against overconsumption. So if you drink too much, you will throw up. Your body will reject that alcohol and it'll be like, nope, I don't want any more of this. And honestly, there's a better chance you're going to throw up before your brain shuts off from too much alcohol. And, there is a concern that you pass out and choke on your vomit, which is unpleasant, but it happens. But you drink too much, your body's going to try to get rid of it. Hangovers are another way that your body's like, hey, you drank too much, don't do that again. You're going to feel like this again. And you kind of learn that, oh goodness, when I mix tequila and wine, I do not feel good the next day. I'm not going to do that again. The negative consequences of drinking too much, of mixing the wrong alcohols, of drinking in the wrong place, the wrong time, are pretty apparent. These things are not necessarily so apparent with cannabis. You're not going to throw up unless you mix cannabis and alcohol, which is a whole other story. Then you're going to increase those chances. You're likely not going to have a hangover. Your body's likely not going to reject the cannabis. And so it can be more difficult with cannabis than alcohol in kind of telling you've had too much or telling that your use has become habitual. There's a lot of people that wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is consume cannabis, and there's no issue with that. For people that wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is consume alcohol, that's a little bit of a different story. And so, cannabis is a medicinal product. It's a therapeutic tool. So the habitual use becomes a little fuzzier. But alcohol, the lines around habitual and overuse are a little bit more drawn in the sand. And so it can be a little bit easier with alcohol to recognize when your use may not be the healthiest.
So it sounds like alcohol is the healthier choice. I'm sorry, cannabis is the healthier choice over alcohol. So if someone's out there right now thinking about replacing their alcohol with cannabis, what are some things that they should consider? And I'll mention, I want to remind people, you can't drink as many drinks, if you're using drinks anyway, like you can if you're going to the bar and you're going to have 3 tequila drinks. You're probably just going to have one. But what should people consider when they're thinking about replacing their alcohol with cannabis?
Well, one you mentioned right there, which is dose, right? So, a lot of people start drinking earlier on in their lives, right? When they're teenagers, when they're young adults, and they kind of learn over time what is their limit and what can they drink and still feel okay. Like, I know for me, I'm a beer drinker, and 1 pint of beer is great. 2 pints is the limit. If I want to feel good the next day, if I don't want a headache, I know those impacts. So no matter where I go, I can say, all right, I know how much beer I can drink and still feel good the next day. Cannabis, not only do you have to kind of figure out your dose, but different products are going to hit you different ways. The variability in dosing is going to be different based on whether you're smoking it or using a vape pen or using a beverage. So you may have it dialed in that like a 5 milligram beverage is like your go-to. And then you go to a party and there's no beverages, but there's vape pens or there's gummies. And it's like, all right, so what is that? What does 5 or 10 milligrams of beverage THC equal in vape hits? Someone's passing around a joint. How strong is that joint? How many hits can I take off of it before it feels like the same dose that I'm used to from another form factor? So if you're really looking to replace alcohol with cannabis, it's nice if you can obtain your own product. And that way you can play around with dose a little bit and you can decide, all right, I like a 5 milligram dose of this particular brand of gummy. So if I'm going to go out, I'm going to bring that with me and I'm going to have it. Now, one of the big differences between cannabis and alcohol is that alcohol is a very social activity. So I might go to a party and I'm going to have 3 drinks while I'm there, but that's over like 4 hours or 5 hours of conversation and hanging out. And I'm nursing that drink for a while and I'm sitting down with people. If you're just eating a gummy, you eat a gummy. You can do that in the bathroom. You can do that anywhere, and that's over. It's done. So I would say that there's the replacing the intoxicating effects of alcohol, and then there's replacing the social aspects of alcohol. And that is a little bit more difficult. So it might be like, well, I'm going to eat this gummy, but then I'm going to bring non-alcoholic beverages with me so I can make a mocktail and I can still have that social experience of hanging out with people and sipping my drink, but I've had the intoxication come from my gummy. It could be moving to hemp or cannabis infused beverages. But if you're somebody that's like, I want to have no more than 10 milligrams of THC this whole night, maybe you're choosing to drink 3 or 4 2 milligram THC beverages so that you can have a couple and not go over that limit. So it's kind of dialing in that dose and how that dose is going to vary across different product forms, and then figuring out how you're going to replace the social aspect of alcohol in addition to the intoxicating aspect.
I'm so glad you brought up the social aspect, because that was going to be my next question that I don't need to ask now, because we do have an episode on using cannabis for anxiety. And I think a lot of people in social situations get anxiety, and so therefore they use alcohol or cannabis. And I just want to be clear, we do not recommend that you mix alcohol and cannabis. So if you're going to the party and you decide that you're drinking, don't get a wild hair and decide that you're going to smoke or take a gummy. That's the worst idea, because you really will find yourself on the toilet throwing up. And so just decide what you're going to do, and you make that conscious decision. And so if you are the person that's going to choose cannabis, and just know that it might just be one drink. And so it may be awkward. It may be something that is new to you, to walk around with water at the party instead of a drink. And so I think that, for me, I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people, because they always have to be holding a drink. But with cannabis, if you choose that, whether it's a cannabis drink or a cannabis gummy or smoking, you can't really do that all night. So yeah, it's a learning curve.
Mocktails were great, right? Because you can create a mocktail for yourself, if they're not going to, I mean, I feel like nowadays, most events or social events I go to, they have alcoholic and non-alcoholic options for people besides just water. But, if you call your host ahead of time and ask, hey, are there going to be any, can you grab, a pack of seltzer, flavored seltzer, right? There's also cannabis beverages, and then there are mix-ins. So there are powders and other shots and things where you can dial in the dose you want. Mm-hmm. So instead of putting all 10 milligrams or 5 milligrams in one drink, measure it out so that there's 2 in your drink. And that way you can have multiple drinks throughout the night. So again, it's really thinking about what's the most THC I want to consume at this event, and then making sure that you're creating an environment where you can have as much as you want to hold in your hand, to walk around with, to drink, and kind of parse that out over the evening.
Yeah, I'll tell you my trick, and you're welcome to use it, is I just get a glass with ice and I put water in there, and then you add a slice of fruit. So it could be an orange slice, a lemon slice, or a lime slice. And who doesn't like flavored water anyway? And nobody questions you. So if you're having trouble with it and making a decision, there you go. You can use that. All right, well, that's a wrap on today's spirited comparison between cannabis and alcohol. Whether you're sipping, smoking, or simply soaking in the facts with us, remember, we're here to explore the science without the stigma. So we're not judging anyone. We just want to get out information. So if you have a question that's been buzzing in your brain or a myth that you want busted, drop us a line, call us. 1-800 personal plants. No, we really don't have that number. But you can drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants.com, and you just might hear your curiosity featured on a future episode. And if you're thirsty for more plant-powered insight, don't forget to leaf through our YouTube garden. We have lots of episodes there. Until next time, stay lifted, stay curious, and always question what you pour into your glass or pack in your pipe. We want you to be mindful and make mindful choices. And then also, I want to tell everyone, we may be taking a little bit of a hiatus. So if you don't hear from us in the next few weeks with a fresh episode, we're just going to take a break and we're going to repurpose some of our old episodes. And we'd love for you to share those with your family and friends. So we'll see you all soon.